Hello there, I'm Jimmy Vegas, and this is how to make a Resident Evil clone in Unity, and welcome to episode 4. In this tutorial, we're going to start some C# coding. Now, we're going to use C# through the entire series, but if you have no programming experience whatsoever, don't worry, we're going to teach you exactly how to do it. Don't forget, click the subscribe button and click the bell icon as well to stay up to date with every tutorial still to come in this series, and indeed everything else on my channel. With that in mind, let's get to work. So coding is used for many different things, and we can acquire a lot of knowledge even from just a simple few lines of code. You'll be amazed at what you can learn. So as I said, everything we're going to do is going to be taught from scratch. So we're going to learn ins and outs of how coding works and how we can use it to utilize things within our scene. So the idea of what I want to happen by the end of this tutorial is we're able to write a script which will, for now at least, allow us to change camera after, let's say, 5 seconds. And that will give us the knowledge ready for when we need to set up the entire camera system. So to do that, let's go to our main asset folder, right click, create, and click on folder. This folder is going to contain all of our code. So let's just call it scripts. And in here, let's right click, create another folder, and we'll call this one camera. So we're going to keep everything as neat and tidy as possible. So everything to do with camera scripting is going to go inside this folder. So let's create our first C# script. Right click, create, and C# script. Make sure we know exactly what the name of this script is, because if you ever change at any point, you will need to change something inside the code, but I'll explain that as we get into it. So I'm going to call this first cam, and the cam is just short for camera. And now let's open that up in a program called Visual Studio. If you're using an older version of Unity, you may open this up in a program called MonoDevelop. It doesn't matter what you use. The scripting is going to be exactly the same. Every line of code will be the same. I'm going to use Microsoft Visual Studio for the entirety of this series. So when you open up, it'll just take a moment to kind of load everything together. Don't worry, that's normal. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. Sometimes it can load up pretty much straight away. I guess it just maybe depends on how it feels, or at least that's what it seems like half the time. So when it's loaded up, I'm going to go through each line as it presents us by default. So here, this is a complete default script. The only thing in here that's customized is this right here, public class. You'll see that that is the name of the script we've just created. So this name here, the public class name, always has to match the script name. So if we were to change this script name here, we would also have to change the public class name right here. So let's start from the top. Here we have 3 items, and these are known as a namespace. A namespace is a way of allowing the code to recognize which kind of, think of it as a library, an area, a resource, think of it something like that, that it would need to pull from in order to accomplish something in the script. A good example of this is if we were to use a UI namespace, we'd be able to modify any text elements that we have on screen. We're not going to use any namespace in this tutorial, but we absolutely will when we get further into development, things like AI and things like UI. Next, we have this public class name, like I say. Everything we write, apart from a namespace, would be inside a class. So everything after this open curly bracket right here. Next, this green line here, this is known as an annotation. An annotation is to basically give a little bit of a note as to what is happening. You don't necessarily have to use them, but they are always wise to have. For example, this one says, use this for initialization. And what it means by that is this will be used when the script starts. And that is referring to the next line right here, which is void start. This is known as a method. Coding goes inside methods, and something called variables goes, well, it can go in either really, but It's nice to always have or at least for me, it's nice to always have the variables separate from the method unless it's absolutely necessary to do so, and sometimes it is necessary to do so. So yes, this is known as a method, and in here is where we'd have all our lines of code which do things. Further down, we have another annotation, and this one is saying update is called once per frame. What that means is if your game is running at, let's say, 60 frames a second, then everything in void update will occur 60 times in a second. It may seem a little bit crazy, a little bit memory intensive, but honestly, it isn't as bad as it sounds one bit. You'll notice each one of these methods is opened with an open curly bracket, and then 2 lines further down, it's closed with a curly bracket. So this is opening the method and closing the method. Now, we're going to write a script, like I say, which will allow us to set a camera changing from the first cam to the second cam after, let's say, 5 seconds. And I figured this is the best way to introduce ourselves to the simplistic form of C#. Now, there is one thing I haven't mentioned simply because it's not here. It's something called a coroutine. Now, a coroutine is something which allows us to further control something within the game, perhaps by time itself. So we're going to actually write a coroutine rather than a method, but we're still going to use a method, in fact, void start method, because we're able to link the two together to allow one to say, you can start doing your lines of code now. So in order for all this to work, we need to establish what we're going to do. So if we head back to Unity, and we have these 2 cameras, both are currently turned on. So let's turn off camera 02 up here by ticking, or rather unticking, up here in the inspector panel. So now when we start the game, we'll just have camera 1 active. So we have 2 cameras. Each of those cameras need to be declared as a variable, and we're also going to have another variable in there to basically have a little bit of variation, and we can see if the camera is changing. So in our script now, let's get rid of void update. So we can select all this and press delete. And let's get rid of this annotation right here. And let's now declare some variables. So between the public class and before void start, we need to type the word public. And I'll explain why public when we get a little bit further into it, but this is where we're able to declare our first variable. So here we declare as public, and then we declare the type of variable. And a type of variable could be a whole number, it could be a decimal number, it could be a game object, it could be an audio source. For this instance, it's going to be a game object because it's going to be a camera. And that camera is classed as a game object because we can see it right here in our hierarchy. Remember, everything here is a game object. Even this note right here is theoretically a game object. So whenever we're referring to something here, it's a game object. Now, here, let's type game object, and you'll note the capitalization here. The capital G and capital O are absolutely important. Capitalization is vital in C# coding. If you don't get the capitalization correct, the script will not work. A good example of that is there is also a game object with a lowercase g. That is not the same as game object with an uppercase G. It may seem a little bit daunting and confusing, especially at first, but honestly, believe me guys, when you get into coding more and more, you will understand it. It'll just come to you all of a sudden. It'll just go like that, and you'll understand. Trust me. So after that, after we've declared the variable type, we now need to give it a name. So I'm going to call this camera 1. And I'm actually typing out the word 1 because I want to highlight something that I will be doing in this series, which is quite common within coding, and that is known as camel casing. So when declaring something like a variable, it's always good to have the first letter of the first word, in this case, as a lowercase, and every subsequent letter, first letter of every word, as a capital. So you can see camera 1. It's just kind of easier on the eyes to understand and kind of recognize what's going on. So the last thing we need to do here is put a semicolon. You'll notice up here in the namespace, we have a semicolon at the end of every line. So every line pretty much is going to end with an open curly bracket, which is this one here, the closed curly bracket, or a semicolon. So when we finish the line, in this case, the variable declaration, we close that line out with a semicolon. The script then knows it moves on to the next line of code. So we'll type that next line of code. So our next one is going to be camera 2. So let's have public, again, game object, and you'll notice you can autofill and it will select what it thinks is the most logical reason to give you, in this case game object like it says, so you can hit enter if it gives you that list. So we'll call this one camera 2 semicolon. Again, there's the camel casing. You don't necessarily have to use camel casing. You could have that as a capital C if you want to. There's no set actual way of declaring a name for a variable. You just can't have two variables with the same name. So set that back to a lowercase c, and remember the capitalization is important. The lowercase p on public, the capital G, the capital O, and always remember your semicolon at the end. So the next variable, although isn't vital, it's a good introduction to the multiple variables that we will use in scripting throughout the rest of this series. As I said, I like the idea of what we're doing here because this gives us a nice simple introduction to coding. So the next variable we're going to declare, public, is known as a bool. B-O-O-L. And a bool is a way of declaring something as either true or false. So you could think of it as on or off. So we're going to say, we're going to set it so as when camera 2 comes on, we change our status of this bool to say true. So let's call this bool something relevant to camera 2. And let's put cam on. And again, this can be any name you want. But let's do something a little different here. Let's not have a semicolon at the end. Let's actually declare this as a value before we even start our script. So we could have equals false, semicolon. So you can do this at any point with your variable declaration. You don't just have to have the type and name. You can also set it as a value up here. I'll explain a little bit more in just a second because we're going to do another variable to say public, and this one is going to be a whole number, which is also known as an integer. Also worth noting that a decimal number in C# is known as a float. A float is a decimal number, but like I say, we're going to deal with a whole number, an integer. And to declare an integer, we just need to type int, all lowercase. And let's call this camera number and semicolon. We're not going to declare this as any type of value yet. So in the case of this, it's going to be a value of 0. Now we could declare the actual value of it here in the variable bit. However, let's go to our method and do it in there. So now we have these 4 variables, the 2 cameras, and 2 extra variables to get some experience with. So inside void start, which is the method, let's actually set that camera number as a value. So camera number, and you can see it has auto-filled, highlighted blue right there. So you can hit return on that and it will auto-fill it. And let's put equals 1, semicolon. So what this is doing is, although when the script without it initializing, the camera number is actually equal to 0, but the instant it starts, the first line of code sets it as 1. Now we're going to leave this method just for now, and we're actually going to write a coroutine. And as I said earlier, coroutine is slightly different than a method because it allows us to, for example, in this case, play with time itself. You can't manipulate time inside a standard void method. You have to do it inside a coroutine. So to write a coroutine, instead of typing the word void, we type capital I and capital E and then numerator. So it's I enumerator, like so. And then we can call this absolutely anything we want with a couple of restrictions. You don't want to call it I enumerator game object. That would be just a little bit silly. It's always good to call coroutines and methods something relevant to what you're doing. So in this case, let's call it camera switch. And then open close bracket, which is your parentheses, because it's just the way the script works, the way it reads and understands what it needs to do. You can declare variables inside these parentheses, but in this instance, we're not going to. And then open curly bracket and hit return. Now, if you're doing the same as me, it will be red underlined, which basically says that there is an error somewhere. However, the reason this is flagging up as an error right now is because we haven't manipulated any time or anything like that. So it thinks, hang on, there's something wrong here. So we need to type a couple of lines of code. So to delay time for, as we said, 5 seconds, we need to type yield, which means hold or wait or stop for a certain amount of time. Then we need to return a value of what we want to wait for. So we need to return, and then we need to type the word new, because we're returning a new value here, and we want to wait for seconds, and in brackets the amount of seconds we want to wait for. Note the capitalization there, the W, F and S. As I said, we're going to wait for 5 seconds, so type 5, close bracket and semicolon. So that's that line now finished with, and you'll notice that camera switch now is not underlined. Next thing we need to do is let's now set camera 2 on and camera 1 off. So it's always best to set a new camera on before you turn an old camera off, just so there's no kind of delay in between and you won't get any errors saying no camera is rendering, because the camera has always got to be rendering for the game to function correctly. So we need to have camera 2, which is the variable that we set up here, dot set active, and it all kind of makes sense because we're doing exactly what we need it to do. So we're saying camera 2 set active. Now in here we use a bool. So as we said earlier, bool can be true or false. So let's set this as true, and then close bracket and a semicolon. So now we have camera 2 as on. So next line of code is going to say camera 1 dot set active, and I'm hoping you guys will know what goes in these parentheses now. Do you know what it is? That's right, it is false, because we're turning it off, because it doesn't need to be on, because we have that camera 2 on now. So at the same time, let's now set this bool as true. So cam on equals true, semicolon. So you'll see when we actually play the game how this works when we have a look at the component. And finally, let's set camera number. So camera number equals 2, semicolon. Now the final thing we need to do is we need to tell the script to start up this coroutine. And to do that, we do that in void start. So after camera number equals 1, we put with a capital S start and then a capital C coroutine, and in brackets the name of that coroutine. In this case we called it camera switch. So camera switch, and then open close bracket to simulate what we've done here, and then close bracket again and semicolon, and then save that script. And you can either hold control or press S to save it, or you can go to file and save. Just make sure you save it, and if you're using Visual Studio you'll see this green line down here to indicate any change you've made has been saved. So let's quickly review this script before we go back into Unity. Inside a public class we've declared the 4 variables: 2 cameras, a bool and an integer. Both of these are kind of irrelevant because they don't do anything, but they'll give us an indication of what's happening to our script. Void start is the method, and in the method we set the camera number to 1 instantly and then start the coroutine. So this line will then take the script down to this coroutine here, and it will start at this line straight away. So it will wait for 5 seconds. After 5 seconds, it will quickly set camera 2 on, set camera 1 off, set the cam on variable as true, and set the camera number variable also as 2. So if we head back into Unity, and in the bottom right, you'll see a little turning down there. All that's doing is compiling the script. If you have red down here saying errors, you can go to the console here, and it will tell you where the error is. But if you've copied me exactly, you won't have any problems. If you do have problems, this script is on my website. If you head over there, go to Downloads and Assets, go to Resident Evil series and tutorial number 4, you'll be able to download this script completely free. So now let's apply this camera script to our scene and actually get it working. So this game object up here, which you have as cameras, it is a game object and we can attach components to it. Now you can either drag and drop this script up here onto cameras, or you can drag and drop it over here into the component area of the inspector panel. So let's drag it onto cameras there, and you'll see that this now becomes a component of this game object. And you can see right here, those are the 4 variables that we have. This is why we type the word public. The public factor allows us to see these variables visually in the inspector panel. Now we just need to set those 2 cameras so the script recognizes which is camera 1 and which is camera 2. To do that, make sure you are clicked on that camera and you are here in the inspector panel, and then drag camera 1 over here and drop it just there. And the same with camera 2. Drag it over here and drop it there. So I'm going to save my scene there. And when I press play now, we won't see anything change here. Nothing will happen for 5 seconds. Suddenly, after 5 seconds, this will become true, which means it'll be ticked. Camera number will become 2 to say we're on camera 2. So let's press play and try that out. So you can see camera number is currently 1. And any moment now, there we go. We're now on camera 2 and cam on is ticked. So let's try that again so we can see the process. So we start, it sets camera number as 1, and we are indeed on camera 1. A few seconds later, it switches to camera 2. Now, this isn't how you theoretically create a camera method, but you can use it on timed methods. But now we understand how we can use these lines of code to manipulate certain objects within a game. So coding is not going to get much harder from here, at least for now. But we've learned the basics, and I just wanted to get the basics of C# covered, the very basics, I should say, within this tutorial. So we're ready to carry on to the next stage. And next tutorial, we're going to take a look at getting a player in here. We're going to take a look at the asset store. Then we're going to move on to tank controls. Then we're going to move on to more camera switching, more coding. We're going to make it look better. There's a massive road we have to take to get this done. If you feel like this is going too fast for you, take it easy, slow down, review everything you're doing. If you feel like this is going too slow for you, best thing you can do right now is build an area up. Build it how you think you would want it to be. Build a map and get yourself ready for what's to come. So guys, until the next tutorial, thank you very much for watching.